Duncan. That's right. He's great. And Duncan sits on the board with the Wellington Waterloo Tourette Association along with myself. And that's a different kind of support group altogether, right? And I asked Duncan if he would come and speak. And I've been very impressed with what Duncan has done within the community. I often hear Duncan's name coming up when I deal with the Board of Education, with hospitals and stuff like that. If I bring up that I know this guy that has Tourette, they'll go, oh, we've heard him speak. And so you're getting people, and that's great. You've done a lot of lectures and in-services and workshops, and you won an award. That's quite impressive. The Richard Stein Memorial Award, making an outstanding difference in the quality of life for people with Tourette. You can tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Okay, first thing actually, before I forget, about questions, and I think, I know whenever I listen to people talk and they say save your questions till the end, because of my ADHD, I don't remember the questions by then. So that really annoys me. So just throw your hands up at any time, I guess, and ask questions, and I'll stop, or just if I've gone over a point and you think I'm full of it, or I haven't made myself clear, to stop and say, well, back up, let's go over this again. So yeah, we'll keep it casual. It's funny, because I was going to start off today saying that I had some trepidation about going on first anyway. Certainly driving 140, 5 minutes before 9 o'clock in the morning, thinking that New Hamburg was a big cruel joke and it didn't actually exist. Made this trepidation a little more real than I had initially let on in my introduction. But I guess at first, initially, before I couldn't find New Hamburg, I was thinking, oh, geez, I'm not sure if I want to go on first. Because I'm thinking, well, I'm really setting the tone for the day. I mean, like, I'm sort of the precedent setter. I'm the first talker, and, this is probably getting first impressions, big deal. And, well, so I sort of, stewed on this for a little while, but since I'm used to getting lemons and making them into lemonade, and it's one of my biggest strategies, I decided, well, okay, yeah, I am going on first, and it's a good thing that I can set the tone for the day. I should actually gear myself intentionally in that direction. Because you'll be hearing a lot about many different disorders today, about Tourette syndrome and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder and obsessive compulsive disorder and learning disabilities. And that can be really overwhelming to be hearing all this information packed into one day. And I think it's particularly taxing if you're trying to store each away in its own individual file as a very separate entity. Okay, this is my ADHD knowledge, this is my OCD knowledge, this is my Tourette's knowledge. And it's a whole lot to take in. It's a lot for the mental workbench up there. So what I hope to accomplish in my hour so that I'm speaking is to help you pull together all of today's material, because a lot of it's complementary and it fits together into the big jigsaw puzzle. They're all different parts of the same elephant that you'll be hearing about today. It should help, I think, with your efficiency to do this when dealing with these different disorders. I mean, for example, a lot of strategies you'll hear about today for working with ADHD. Well, they work with Tourette's as well. And vice versa. I mean, strategies that will work for people with Tourette's will also work for people with ADHD. And all of these strategies also work pretty well with normies, with the normal form. I know that oftentimes when I go into schools and do in-services and such, a lot of teachers very validly feel overwhelmed and a little bit hesitant to have folks like myself come in and talk about all sorts of different disorders, because I mean they've got so many kids in the classes. It's like 30 kids, and I mean if you're looking at it like, okay, I've got to, there's my strategies for all the normies, and then there's this one person with some special needs. I've got to remember specific things to do with them, and I've got to remember specific things to do with this person. Of course, I mean you're there to teach already. You've got a lot on your mind already, and then thinking about all these 30 individualized cases around the classroom. I mean that can really blow your mind, and I wouldn't want to be in that position either. But which is why I'm going to frame my talk in this direction today, that the importance isn't really learning new strategies, it's just learning a slightly new mind frame, and that taking this mind frame on will help you work with ADHD and Tourette's and OCD, and in fact, it'll work for the normies too. I know I've spoken with different parents before that have come up to me and quite amazed, and they say to me, geez, I found the neatest thing the other day, and I wonder if you've heard of this before. I've got my 7-year-old son with ADHD or whatever, and I've learned these different strategies for dealing with him. Well, one day I decided to experiment on my 12-year-old son who doesn't have ADHD, doesn't have anything. He's a normie. And so I tried these strategies on him too, and they worked. And these parents would be really surprised. My gosh, these same strategies work. And so I thought it was worth pointing out that it's not a surprise that they work. Because what I want you to keep in mind for the day, and what I hope to point out in my hour, is that what people do with Tourette's isn't different from it's not qualitatively different. It's not alien from what normal people do. Everyone has motor movements. Everyone, if a person has a tic like this with Tourette's, people, if they have hair hanging in their eyes or something, they make the same movements. Vocalizations and utterances that people with Tourette's make, other people are making these vocalizations too. It's just a matter of degree, and it's a matter of maybe people with Tourette's having a few more motor movements, or a few more exaggerated motor movements, or a few less orchestrated motor movements. And again, people that are, the normies out there, they all have shifting attention too. Provided on whether I'm interesting to you or not today, you might find that. But anyone can sometimes have problem paying attention. They're thinking about other things. And that's what's going on with the person with ADHD. Again, it's just a matter of degree. It's a little bit bigger. It's a little bit more frequent or prevalent in the person with ADHD than it is with sort of the normal population. So because when you're looking at these different disorders, they're not something alien, they're not something different, they're just a little bit more of one thing or another, or a little bit less of one thing or another. The strategies can follow suit. They don't have to be completely alien different strategies. I'm going to deal with this person this way, but this person this way. You modify the strategy for the person. If they have a little bit more of, if the person with the disorder has a little bit more of something in a particular area, the strategy that you would use in that normal situation, you just sort of amplify it a little bit to catch up with the person that has the disorder. So again, it's a matter of degree. Basically the way I'm going to present is I'm going to give a general overview of Tourette's in particular, and then I'm going to start fading into the structure in which attention deficit disorder and obsessive compulsive disorder all can kind of be understood together. Okay, so first of all, Gilles de la Tourette syndrome was first identified by Georges Gilles de la Tourette in 1885. It's gone through a lot of changes. It's been called a lot of different things, recognized as a lot of different things, but it's Tourette's now. Just, a few quick and dirty fact type things. It manifests typically between 7 and 10. It tends to be more prevalent in boys, but as new studies are coming out, and as sort of the definition of Tourette's and such is changing, that initial big ratio difference, like 9 to 1 or whatever it was initially, some studies were not. That's been starting to decrease as Tourette's has been starting to get fit into a different mind frame than originally. And I'll talk about these two different mind frames as well. Also, because of the changes in definitions of Tourette's from sort of the old school to the new school that I'll talk about today, the prevalencies, depending on who you talk to, really differ. Sort of the old schools, it's just tics, and then Tourette's can be seen as fairly rare, like 1 in 20,000 or so. But the more contemporary research, which I'm going to be talking about today, which fits all of these different disorders together, has really sort of upped the prevalency, and a lot of people talk about it being maybe 1 in 100 or even more than that. So sort of the old school then, which the Psychology Bible still kind of abides by. DSM-4 is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, and it's the Psychology Bible. But It focuses just on ticks, like integral to the diagnosis. You have to have multiple motor ticks and one or more vocal ticks many times a day, intermittently. You can do that yourself. But I make a point at this juncture usually to define a tick. Because I made a mistake one summer. I was working for this one fellow in a crops garden, and he didn't know anything about psychology or neurological disorders or Tourette's or anything like that. And I just told him one day, oh, I have ticks. I didn't clue in. Maybe he just wasn't a fellow that liked to be in my personal space. And at the end of the summer, he finally mustered up the courage and came to me and kind of shuffled his feet and studied the ground and said, well, do they have a cream or something, a spray? And suddenly, I clued in. So tick, I tend to use the word tick without the K. But it's synonymous to twitches. I mean, so the definition of a twitch, I'll throw that up here. Basically, sudden, rapid, recurrent, non-rhythmic motor movements or vocalizations. I'm going to go into this in a little bit more detail because twitches are kind of neat for a variety of reasons. First of all, there's a lot of different ones. I mean, some of my repertoire include shaking my head like such and blinking a lot, doing that, and what other ones I had. The various vocal ones, a snort like that, or a vocal tick like that. And every person's individual, I suppose. You shouldn't look at, like, the various ticks aren't, like, it's symptomatic to have ticks, but there aren't particular ticks that you have to have Tourette's. It's not like a cold where you sort of run down a symptom list. Okay, you have a stuffy nose, you have this, you're a little bit tired, you're whatever. Therefore, you have a cold. Like, it's not like, well, if you don't snort, you don't have Tourette's. I'll talk about why that is in a little bit. But ticks. Yep.
You said that the onset was usually age 7 to 10,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm just wondering if this is sort of a neurological disorder, sort of a thing that happened, why it would take until age 7 for it to start. Have you read anything about
I haven't read anything about that. There are other signs that show up before 7 to 10, like as I'll be talking about sort of the new school, or a lot of these disorders fit together. Oftentimes when these kids are 3 or 4, the ADHD starts to surface. And they're initially diagnosed with ADHD, and then when they hit 7 to 10, the tics start showing up. And people realize, oh, wow, and they can get the diagnosis.
Because common sense would make you think that it might be starting earlier.
Yeah, but then again, I mean, we have genes that make us lose hair, or our hair turn white. And those are time triggered, that you have to hit a certain age before they manifest. So I guess I kind of look at it that way. Okay? Tics, first of all, they can be suppressible, but not entirely. There's always a cost involved. That if I'm proctoring an exam, as I'm doing this Saturday, and I decide, okay, these 5,000 people don't really want to hear me barking while they're trying to write the psychology exam, I will kind of hold in. I'll kind of do a mental. And it takes a lot of conscious control. It's very taxing to do that. And the end cost is that it's worse in the end. So whereas right now what I do is I don't really fight it. I just kind of let it bleed out of me as it wants. But the analogy I always picture is if you're standing in front of a dam and there's water kind of leaking through this hole in the dam, you stick your finger in the hole to keep the water from coming through. Okay, that's a temporary solution, but the longer you have your finger in the hole, the more and more the water builds up on the other side, and the more and more pressure builds up until eventually there's enough pressure that not only blows your finger up, but blows you back about 20 feet and you get soaked. So when I was younger, I know, I grew up in a very small, very normal community, and any time I ticked, it was people didn't understand what was going on. It was very embarrassing, humiliating for me. So I did do a lot of suppression, But what I would find is when no one was around, like that once a week, that blissful night where both my parents were working and my sister was off at a friend's house or something, and I had the whole house to myself, I'd be that Tasmanian devil, spinning around the apartment, letting out all of these tics that have been building up, and just, it takes a lot of conscious control to suppress, but it's also, it's a very anxious thing. The analogy I use to help people understand what tics are like is I talk about itches, like as if you rolled in poison ivy and you just had, your whole body was just afire with itches. And also analogous to if you have a mosquito bite. I mean, if you itch it, it feels better for a second. It's like this, quick, fleeting satiation. But then, it starts again, like itching a mosquito bite once just doesn't do it. You have to keep itching it. And also, I mean, I think particularly if you have poison ivy, you don't want to spread it by, scratching and touching other area bodies, so you try and refrain from itching it. And the longer you try and hold back from itching it, the bigger that itch gets. It just seems to start beckoning to you, like, itch me. You're like, no, I can't itch you, no, itch me. And it takes up more and more and more of your resources. You're like, I'm not gonna itch, and you're kind of clenching your teeth, finally, and you give up and you itch it, and it's satiated for a second, thank you, and then it comes back again, starts itching again. The final way is kind of like an itch is, sometimes if you are going through that battle, I'm not going to itch, I'm not going to itch, I'm not going to itch, and you're going through this very conscious battle, if you're distracted by something and you start working on a different project, before you know it, your hands just kind of wandered over and casually itched it, once your conscious guard has dropped, sort of thing. So it's a frustrating thing. It's going to come up no matter what. Stress sort of fuels or exacerbates symptoms. I know my friends can always step their watches by me for midterms coming up or exams coming up. That as soon as I start thinking about the impending exams and I start getting a little stressed and I'm staying up late studying so I don't get a whole lot of sleep or whatever, I come to school, my tics are worse. And so that's the signal for my friends. Oh, what day is it? Oh, yeah, I guess it's about time we start studying for exams. There's our alarm. So, alrighty. I was talking about how there are a lot of diverse tics. I can actually throw up overhead of that. How do I just do this? Okay. So there's just a few of the tics right there. Oliver Sacks wrote something about tics at one point, and I could say it in my own words, but he's much more eloquent than I am. So I'm just going to read a little section that he said about tics. Tics can have an ambiguous status, partway between meaningless jerks or noises and meaningful acts. Though the tendency to tic is innate in Tourette's, the particular form of tics often has a very personal or historical origin. Thus a name, a sound, a visual image, a gesture, perhaps seen years before and forgotten, may first be unconsciously echoed or imitated, and then preserved in the stereotypic form of a tic. Such tics are like hieroglyphic, petrified residues of the past, and may indeed, with the passage of time, become so hieroglyphic, so abbreviated, as to become unintelligible, as God Be With You was condensed, collapsed after centuries to the phonetically similar but meaningless goodbye. So basically, what he's saying there is that when you see a person's repertoire of tics, they're very individualized. It's sort of like a warped, condensed autobiography of the person, if you will. And to give you a couple of personal examples of that, I mentioned already, actually, that I have a tic like this, and that is because I had very long bangs when I was in about grade 7. And they were always, the sheepdog look, they're always looking in my eyes, so I flip them out of my eyes. And it was a movement that the Tourette's, was aha, and it was easy to prey on because it's always the same movement. I mean, it's a very sort of simple movement that you do over and over again, and that's the sort of thing that the Tourette's will prey on. And of course, the tic will then become independent of where you got it from, because once I figured out what was going on, I shaved my head, and it didn't matter. My tic was still throwing that imaginary hair out of my eyes. So yes, it had an origin, but it became independent of that. Another one that I've had is this one's particularly embarrassing. Have you ever you put on some weight or whatever, and your pants get really tight. You have a really tight pair of jeans that you're wearing. You're kind of going like this, and maybe your underwear is, rides up a little bit because you've got a really tight pair of pants on. So you kind of walk along, you give it a little shake to get it down. Yeah, it became a tick. People just thought it was adorable, which embarrassed me even more. And you have to be really careful about doing that in front of bars. I'll walk by, because of course I've got blinking ticks too, and sometimes I can look like a wink. So I walk by some Harley Davidsons and kind of bolt at that point. What's another example? First year at university, we had a karaoke machine, and it was about 3 in the morning. We were all drinking. We were having a great time. We had the karaoke machine in the window, and we were yelling at people through the karaoke machine out in the courtyard, just having a great old time, just laughing our heads off. You know how when you laugh sometimes so hard you snort and say, ah, and then everyone else like, ah, and so then that makes you start laughing even more, and then you start snorting even more. Well, that is where my snort tick came from, and that one was very obvious, because I literally, I did it once. It was that night that I was snorting, and I woke up the next morning, and it was a tick. And I had that tick, consistently for about a year, really, before it moved on to something else. But so I think you can get fairly introspective as to what can turn into a tick and what can't. Because I've got lots of friends that, of course, want to take advantage of this. They think of all sorts of embarrassing movements. They walk by and they, hey, Doug, and or something like that. I'm like, no, no, that's not going to happen. And coprolalia, which is a vocal type of tick where you swear, where you're just talking along and just suddenly rip off with a swear word in the middle of whatever. Of course, all my friends want to, buy into this too, and they'll give me little scripts to read to, a prof they don't like. Please, here's $20. Just say this. And I mean, usually it is just a joke with me. That they'll do something like this, yeah, whatever. But every once in a while, it's almost like the Tourette's is like this, sleeping beast in my head. And they'll make some movement, and I'll be like, oh yeah, right. Wouldn't that be funny if it was a tick? And I would do it. And it's almost like the Tourette's is kind of. What was that? And I can see, its attention's peaked. I'm like, oh, I'm not doing that again. Because that'll become a tick. The other thing about ticks is that they can not only wax and wane, so that, one day I'm barking a little bit, the next day I'm barking a lot. But, they'll switch, one day I'm barking, the next day I'm snorting. Or it doesn't usually happen that quickly, but over a period of a few months, I'll go from more, say, vocal ticks to more motoric ticks. Yeah?
This is probably a really dumb question.
There are no dumb questions, only dumb answers.
Has hypnotics ever played a role in trying to reverse some of this, like subconsciously? It's kind of a conscious sort of,
Yeah.
thing in your brain. Have you ever done a hypnotic thing to try and subconsciously?
Yeah. Well, I know hypnosis has been talked about in the Tourette's literature. A couple things is, first of all, initially it's sort of conscious, but it becomes an automatic type of reflex thing, so that it isn't that easy to change. The other thing is, I have been hypnotized a few times. I like it. It's fun. And but really, what hypnosis isn't really what the general sort of popular myth is. It's not this altered state of consciousness where you're really brainwashing the person or whatever. It's really more of a heightened relaxation and a heightened susceptibility to suggestion. So you'll do silly things because this person just seems so cool for making you so relaxed that you're willing to push the envelope and do some things that you wouldn't normally do. So I often see that my tics decrease when I'm hypnotized, but it's only during the hypnotic session. The reason why is because I mentioned that tics are very much fueled by stress. And I don't necessarily, I use the example of exams, but it doesn't even have to be that explicit a stress. It could just be the stress of not getting much sleep the night before, being hungry, being in a room of people. Like when I'm alone in my apartment, I don't tick at all. As soon as I walk outside, by the time I have the key in the door, just the extra environment around me has got me ticking. So I think the reason hypnosis helps immediately is just because it gets you so relaxed. And so it's basically taking the fuel out of the car for a few minutes. But no, certainly like people have used hypnosis, and probably a more long-lasting idea along that lines is learning meditation strategies like yoga and such, just sort of centering yourself. Of course, the problem with sort of muscular relaxation type exercises is it's almost like throwing the baby out with the bathwater. That yeah, you're sort of globally relaxing yourself so you don't have any tics, but you don't have much else either. I mean, like meditating is incompatible with tics, but it's also incompatible with getting your work done, type thing. But I mean, on weekends, that might be like a good weekend strategy to regroup type thing. What was I? Oh, okay. I know what I was going to say. Okay, not only can tics, sort of wax and wane the individual tic, but they can also switch back and forth. And usually you can kind of predict that too. It's sort of whatever area your concentration field is in at the time, that's where your tics are going to be focused. So, for example, one summer when I had a very motoric job, I mean, I wasn't speaking to anyone, I was out in the field hoeing beans. And I was moving all day but not talking. Well, sort of my concentration, my energy, I guess, was tied up into motoric movements. So that's where the Tourette's took a wand or two then. And more specific than that, it was tics involved with whatever I was using. So that I'm standing all day and I'm moving and I'm walking while I'm hoeing. So this tic, really got going and moving my legs. And since I was hoeing, I sort of got arm tics going. But when that summer was over and I went back to school, or particularly now that I'm a graduate student, where verbosity is the rule, and you're always speaking, I mean, now my vocal tics have really picked up, and my motoric tics have kind of calmed down. It's kind of like if you've got a bag of chips. If they're sitting right in front of you, you're going to have a much, much bigger desire to pull them open and eat them than if the same bag of chips is in the other room and kind of shoved up into a closet. And there's one surgeon out in BC, and he's got Tourette's, and I know he talks about a similar type of thing where he's got like a touching tic, and he said to Oliver Sacks in one of his books that he wrote that proximity has a lot to do with things. That if he's really close to this lectern, you'd have to be touching symmetrically, like each corner and such. But if the lectern was halfway across the room, that desire would be gone. And something closer to him, he would have the desire to touch it type thing. So it's this chip analogy over again. That now the chips are put away in the cupboard. They're a ways away, so that the urge dies. Okay, so I was mentioning that you can have a lot of different tics, and none of them are specifically definitive of Tourette's. It's just the idea that you have a stereotype, random type movement. That the Tourette's kind of preys on. Okay, so that was just sort of my quick go through of like the old school, like what's definitive Tourette's, just the tics. I focused on how the tics can be kind of neat and how you can kind of anticipate them and such. And anticipation is an important thing. I mean, even if you can't directly suppress and you're out of control that way, it does really ease your mind, ease your anxieties, helps you build a little bit of self-confidence and esteem. If you at least know what's going on, and you can kind of predict when it's going to be worse and when it isn't, and you can kind of see what tics might be coming, because you are in more control that way, because then you can start doing things about it. Like, that stress fuels it. Well, okay, I'm going to, make amends to my life so that I don't have quite as much stress in it, and so that will minimize the tics in an indirect way. Or I know that walking in this room full of people, my tics are going to go crazy, so I'm just not going to walk into that room full of people type thing. I mean, if I don't have to. And so in a way, you start to gain some of the control back that you've lost by the fact that you can't control that your body's moving, and you can't control the misperceptions and the misinterpretations of you. So anyway, that's the tics. After I got diagnosed with Tourette's in my first year of university, this obviously gave me a lot of relief. Wow, okay, I'm not just a freak, I'm not just globally bad. There's a label to this, I can understand it, I can kind of, you know, externalize it, look at it now as a package and try and figure out what's going on and find ways of dealing with it and such. But, I mean, that didn't last for very long. And the reason is because I didn't feel like I had the whole picture yet. Okay, I understand why I have these urges to do these different tics and such, but there seems to be a hell of a lot more things that are going on with me right now that haven't been explained yet. Like, I mean, I was always very much a loner, and I didn't really want to be because I like people, but I seem to be missing something. Like the day that people were supposed to line up and get their How to Make Friends books, you know, I was sick or something. And there was some kind of subtlety that I was missing. And I was a very, very, very oversensitive person. I worried about things constantly and would get stuck on one thing and just think about it, and I wouldn't be able to move on. It would ruin my entire day because this thing oftentimes I realized was pretty silly, you know, was just, you know, I couldn't remove it from my mind. So I was a very moody person for that reason. I was always getting in trouble for being so impulsive that I would just kind of, you know, rather than ready, aim, fire, I would kind of ready, fire, aim, oops, and get myself in trouble with my parents, where, you know, we told you not to do that, and I mean, you do it anyway, and so you must be wanting to do it. You must be, you know, purposely, consciously, you know, being manipulative and being just a miserable, malicious kid, and on and on and on and on. And and I just kind of thought, well, maybe I am, because I am doing these things, so, you know, maybe they're right. When I was at university, I mean, well, even before I was at university, but it became very pronounced at university, I was abysmal with money management, with organizing my finances. I just couldn't do it. I mean, it was all gone, you know. I'd be given, you know, $200. Okay, this is for your rent. And we walk on, okay, this is for my rent, this is for my rent. What a really nice snare drum. walk over, and there, I got myself a new snare drum. Oh, rent, darn. I just fired before I aimed again, shoot. And I always had a really bad temper. And I would have, you know, what I call now rages, and I just didn't see it as that right now. I just had to have temper tantrums, and just a lot of the time that was fueled by the fact that I knew lots of things I was having a lot of difficulty with that other people just sort of did automatically, for granted, and it was very frustrating just to feel like I was putting in 3 times the effort as anyone else, but only getting 1/3 of the results. And sort of paradoxically, the more effort I put in, the less effort people attributed to me putting in, like, you're not trying at all. Well, no, I am. And so I, you know, throwing up your hands in frustration and such. So I did a little bit more reading into the Tourette's research then. Like, there's got to be more to this than just the tics. And I started realizing that there are a lot of other conditions that usually occur with Tourette's, and these are just some of the big names. But it's a whole package that seems to be going on. And I've started seeing myself fitting into these different things. Okay, I can go back into my life and organize things a little bit better. Okay, when I was totally stuck on this, okay, maybe it was a bit of that. Or you know, when I was having trouble with this, maybe it was a little bit of that. And it occurred to me then that it wasn't just a fluke that all of these things seem to occur together. It's not just a coincidence that 90% of people with Tourette's have OCD and 85% of people with Tourette's have ADHD. It wasn't just by chance. There's sort of a unifying concept to all of these different things, and that's what I'm going to start getting into about the new school of Tourette's now. What this unifying concept is that of disinhibition. Just the brakes are off. You're disinhibited. I mean, you're a little bit closer to the surface. Things just come out a little bit quicker. You don't have the same editors, the same sort of deliberating mechanisms in your head to make you sort of think about things or organize things or orchestrate movements or thoughts or attention or whatever. It just kind of pops out as soon as, you know, it occurs to you. And so, I mean, you can look at all these different problems then as really different manifestations of the same underlying problem of disinhibition, so that when you've got Tourette syndrome, I mean, it's a motoric disinhibition. So, I mean, it's sort of, your motor movements are just bubbling a little closer to the surface, and they just kind of pop out. So, like I say, everyone, you know, turns their head, you know, at a particular time. Say someone's talking to you over here. And so you send a very deliberate, very orchestrated message to your head. Okay, someone's talking to you right now. You want to see who it is. Turn your head over there to see it. Now, when a person with Tourette's turns their head, it's just sort of a random thing. Like there's no orchestration to it. It's just sort of, you know, a possibility occurs to you. Wow, you can turn your head right now. You do it. And so these movements are the same sort of movements other people are doing, but they're just kind of, they're popping out at times where they don't need to pop out. So that would be motoric disinhibition. Then you can have attentional disinhibition, so that rather than energy kind of popping around your body, like, okay, move your arm right now, shake your head right now, you know, shake your bum right now, you know, make a weird noise right now. It's, what's going on over here? Oh, what's going on over here? No, pay attention to this. No, think about this. No, what's going on? I want to see what's going on. And your attention is leaping all over the place. Hence, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. You can have thought disinhibition, where a particular thought is a little closer to the surface, and it keeps occurring to you, and it keeps rising to the surface, and you can't get rid of it, you can't turn it off. And so you're thinking, you know, did I lock the door? 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 And hence, you've got obsessive compulsive disorder. So, I mean, it's really, again, I say it's different manifestations of kind of the same underlying process. It's disinhibition, but kind of where the disinhibition shows up is what you're defined with. And the way I often look at it is, because I think about it as disinhibition, I've kind of gotten away from it's me and the disorder. Like there's sort of me over here, and then I put up a wall, and here's, you know, the little uglies over here that I can sort of put a bow on and call Tourette syndrome or whatever. There's not that kind of distinction. Because it's a disinhibition problem, it's all me. It's just that I'm amplified. I'm just a little bigger. I mean, I'm doing the same sorts of things. I'm thinking the same sorts of things that anyone else would, or that I would if I had this disorder. It's just that it's almost a rape of privacy. I mean, whereas most people, a whole bunch of things can occur to them to do, to say, to think, and they kind of filter and decide what to show. I don't have that filter. It occurs to me and it immediately happens. So that, you know, if you're ever getting told off by your boss, you're kind of sitting there thinking all the different names you could call this person, but then there's a little part of your brain that goes, think about the consequences, and you could do this, but that would probably lead to this. Well, maybe you should do this. Well, this might be a good thing to do. And then you decide to just kind of nod stupidly and look at your feet. And then you, later on, go into your office, pull the blind, you know, shut the door, and and you get out of your system that way, or you go home and kick the dog or whatever. I mean, that filter right there is what the people with the Tourette's or the ADHD don't have and such. And so often it's sort of an irony or not really an irony. It looks hypocritical to me when I look at other people, because I know they're thinking the same thing or whatever. But it bursts out of me. And oftentimes I hear about it too. Like what they do is they put on their filters, they don't laugh or anything. And then we get back to our office, they close the blinds, they close the door, and they go, thank you. I wanted to say, we were all thinking it, and you came out with this. I'm quite convenient for all these people. Good ornament. I mean, I get to be their id for them, I guess. So, I guess one analogy I used to talk about this is like popcorn. I mean, most people, you know, if they're making popcorn, they've got their popcorn contained in this nice little bag. So they put it in the microwave, and they turn on the microwave. So, you know, popcorn's flying all over the place inside the bag. But outside, you don't see anything because you've got this nice cover over it. And so then that person can choose when they're going to pull the popcorn out, when they're going to open the bag, which particular kernels they're going to take out. Well, we either have a hole in our bag or we don't have a bag at all. Lob the popcorn in the microwave and duck. Fly all over the place, hitch in the eye. So some of the research that's been some of the research that's being done, the literature that's being written, is by Dr. David Covington along this line. He's starting to talk about a generalized disinhibition disorder, where basically, like you can have different kinds of schizophrenia. You can have, you know, there's schizophrenia, but then you have different subtypes. He's talking about disinhibition in this way, that you have sort of a generalized disinhibition disorder, and then you have various subtypes. You'd have the Tourettic subtype, and you'd have the ADHD subtype, and you'd have the OCD subtype. And basically what he's talking about is that he's going from a genetic angle, and he suggests that it's sort of an additive thing. Like the genes are additive upon themselves, so you could have one gene that predisposes you towards disinhibition, or you could have a couple, or you could have more than that. You could have 3 or 4, and sort of the more genes you have, the more disinhibited you're going to be. And he talks about where you probably, if you have one, what he calls GTS gene, that's one of these disinhibition genes, you might have ADHD, or you might have OCD, or you might have some learning disabilities or something like that. But if it's added on to that, if you have, say, 2 GTS genes, then you've got Tourette's with all of these associated conditions, because Tourette's is almost an additive condition. I mean, this doctor I mentioned out in BC who often speaks, the way he defines himself Tourette's is he calls it ADHD plus tics. And oftentimes, you know, if you take a person in for a neurological scan or whatever, I mean, the things that have gone wrong in ADHD, those same things have gone wrong in the head of the Tourettic. I mean, they're virtually indistinguishable. It's just that in addition to those things going wrong, there's also some other things going wrong over here in the brain also. So it's almost like an additive thing. Okay, you start off being disinhibited in one place due to one gene. Well, you know, if you add into another gene, okay, we're going to be disinhibited over here too. And it just kind of gets worse and worse and worse. My sort of personal slant to that as well is I look at it as almost like a medical stress type thing. Like, you know, doctors will often tell you, you know, that you're going to get sick at your weakest possible time type thing. That, I mean, there's probably all sorts of cold and flu and such germs floating around in the room right now. And sorry to all the OCD people, but I mean, if you're well rested and you know your immune system's doing really well right now and such, I mean, even though all those germs are out there, they're not going to get you. They're not going to invade you. You're not going to wake up tomorrow with a cold or the flu. But I mean, if you're weakened, if your immune system's weakened in some way, then those germs have a chance sort of sneak in. You have some sort of stress on your body, you haven't gotten sleep or whatever, so the germs get a chance to sneak in. You wake up the next day, you're sick. I've got sort of the same view in the head, I guess, with Tourette's and these different disinhibition disorders, that basically you're born with this genetic stuff. Okay, so you're predisposed to be disinhibited. I mean, it's just like, okay, I've got blonde hair, I've got blue eyes, I'm tall, whatever. I'm also just, you know, my body's ready to be disinhibited. But maybe my body doesn't know how it's going to be disinhibited yet. And so I need, it's sort of almost roving around looking for a place to roost and to manifest. And because, like, there's a lot of different literature out there that shows that these different disorders can have triggers. Like, right now they're talking a lot about how kids that have Tourette's also had, you know, very severe strep throat 2 or 3 times when they were maybe around 3 to 5. And it's not the strep throat that has given them Tourette's, because I mean, lots of kids have strep throat and they, you know, don't wake up, you know, barking and shaking their head and stuff. But what that would be the trigger. That would be the opportunity for this sort of disinhibition roving around. Where am I going to land? Where am I going to land? Well, the doctors have found that when these kids have this really severe strep throat, it damages a part of their brain. So the disinhibition is, aha! And the part of the brain that it affects is the motoric areas of the brain. So the disinhibition kind of pounces and lands, and hey, you're diagnosed with Tourette's syndrome. But let's say rather than having strep throat at 3 to 5, you're deprived of oxygen at birth. That's often, in the ADHD literature, a trigger for these kids. Often there's birth complications where these kids have been momentarily deprived, and that may weaken the frontal lobes or something like that. And so the disinhibition that's roving around, I can land here. So the kid grows up diagnosed with ADHD. These different things don't have to be mutually exclusive. I mean, like, the lines between these different disorders can get really blurry. For example, I mean, often obsessive-compulsive disorder and ADHD, they've kind of got this bizarre hybrid that, I mean, your thoughts are jumping around between 15 different things, which is the ADHD, but you're always going back to the same 15 things. So it's almost like a cycle. So you're doing both at the same time. I mean, sure, your thoughts are jumping around, but it's the same 15 things. Your thoughts are almost lapping and just kind of going around the track and going back. So you've also got the OCD there as well. So how do you pick those two apart? If you've got a child in school that's OCD and Tourettic, And if they're trying to suppress, I mentioned it takes a lot of conscious thought to suppress your tics. And your thoughts also kind of have to jump around. I'm going to suppress this tic, now I'm going to suppress this tic, now I'm going to suppress this tic, now I'm going to suppress this tic. And now I'm going to suppress this thought. No, don't think about this. Oh, I won't think about that again. No, I don't want to think about that. I don't want to show this. I better suppress this. I'm supposed to be paying attention, by the way. But I better stop this tic. I better start. It's ADHD all of a sudden. You know, this kid's not paying attention in class. They're very distractible. And it's because, you know, 90% of their resources are being used up trying to stick their fingers in all of these holes in the dam. So the lines can get really blurred, and I mean, you can have more than one problem. And I thought one way of looking at this might be to use kind of an analogy here. I thought it was about 2 in the morning, so bear with me. If picture this as your brain, okay? Okay, it doesn't look much like it. I'll get to that, how it looks like. Okay. Basically, okay, if you pretend this is your brain, and if I had water in this glass, I don't because I'd get myself soaked. But if this is sort of the disinhibition, okay? So if you look at each one of these individual compartments, these are sort of different areas that your brain is in charge of. So this is like the attention area of your brain, and this is the area that's in charge of your motor movements, and this is the area that's in charge of you know, thought suppression and such like this. So you sort of got all the different compartments in your brain. Now this was the disinhibition, and I poured this on top. The disinhibition's just kind of sliding around. It's looking for a place to land. Now, if I've had, you know, strep throat, which I found out I did actually, which fits, between 3 or 5 or whatever, then I poke a hole right here. That's the trigger. And the water then has a place to go. And it kind of, it then goes into this little cube and it fills up the motoric disinhibition area. Or, you know, I'd had, you know, birth complications that, you know, damaged my frontal lobes. That's a trigger, that's a hole, that's a stress over here. So rather than the water going in over here, it all goes over here and goes into this area. So then I start having problems in my intentional areas. And it gets more complicated than that. I mean, you might have both. You might have a hole there, you might have a hole here, and you might have a hole over here, and you might have a little bit of a hole over here. So maybe the biggest hole's here. So most of the water goes over here, so you're mostly Touretted. But maybe a little bit of water goes over here too, so you have some ADHD elements. You have a little bit slide over here, so you have some OCD elements. I mean, this may help you see that each person can be very individualized. That, I mean, it's not sort of a cut and dry thing, that if you see one person who's Touretted that acts a certain way, and you see another person who's Touretted that acts a different way, it doesn't mean they have different disorders, they just have different manifestations of it. Yeah?
During, in June, in the conference in June, Dr. Amon had said something about head trauma.
Mm-hmm.
Could that also be possibly making a hole type thing?
Yeah, that could be a trigger.
Disinhibition would trigger?
Yeah, because it's always a combination between environment and what's going on in your head. I mean, if I just had all these holes in my head, but I is that on if I just had all these holes in my head, but I was in an environment completely, well, like without any stress whatsoever, where I didn't have to pay attention to anything, and then you know, I wouldn't have these disorders. You sort of need an environment for it to happen in. But on the other hand, I could be in a very stressful environment. I could have to sustain my attention for days at a time, or you know, keep myself motorically contained for days at a time. But if I don't have the holes in my head, I also don't have the disorder. It's like Freshie, really. I mean, Freshie's made of water and colored sugar. If the colored sugar is the problems in your head, and the water is the environment, I mean, you need to have both of them together, and they become something new. They become like a hybrid of the two. They become Freshie. You take away the sugar, you don't have Freshie anymore. But also, if you take away the water, you still don't have Freshie anymore. You need both of them combined together. What time's the game to be? I don't have a watch.
It's 8 minutes on.
8 minutes after 10? And how long can I go? Till 10:30? Okay. How long can I go? Can I keep you trapped forever and tell you all about me? Okay. So to go on from there. Okay, so we've poked a hole someplace in our brain here. The disinhibition's poured into that hole. We've slotted ourselves, okay? It's fallen into the motoric area. So we've gone to the neurologist. You have Tourette's syndrome because you've got motoric disinhibition. Excuse me. Okay, so now I have Tourette's. Where do we go from there? Okay, the disinhibition sort of found its area in which to express itself. But now, It actually needs to express itself, and there's different ways that can happen. I mean, first of all, you can just then use it up in ticks. So, I'm just, doing this all the time, and that kind of, uses up the water then. So, I'm sort of doing my satiation by doing my ticks and getting them out this way. But how it comes out motorically can be affected. It's just, remember, all we're talking about here is motoric disinhibition. We're not talking about good motoric disinhibition or bad motoric disinhibition. It's just, you are motorically disinhibited and it needs to come out. How is it going to come out? Well, you notice I'm really not ticking up here at all. But, if I'm listening to a question or if I'm involved in a conversation where I'm not speaking, I'm listening to the other person speak, or after I sit down, I'm listening to other speakers up here, you'll notice my tics will increase quite a bit. It's not that I'm suppressing. What it is all of that motoric disinhibition is going in very good, I guess, sort of, societally acceptable ways right now. I mean, when you think about when you're speaking in front of an audience, there's a lot of things you need to do simultaneously all at once. You need to be organizing your thoughts. You need to be organizing how your mouth is going to move. You need to look around the room, make sure people aren't putting up hands. You need to gauge the audience to see if they look confused, if they look bored, so that you can modify what you're saying. You need to look at your notes, make sure you're still on track. You need to look at your watch to make sure that, or ask someone else the time, to make sure that you're not going over. So it's not that it's not like my motoric disinhibition has gone away. It's just that I'm using it all up in ways that don't necessitate tics right now. Because if you go back to the water analogy, I don't have any extra water left. It's taking so much water for me to stand up here and talk that all the water's used up, and I don't need to tic. But once I'm sitting down, I'm doing a lot less. I'm not talking. I don't have to think about what I'm doing anymore, I think. And so that, the water level rises a bit again. I'm not doing enough with this disinhibition anymore, and the tics come back. This is also often why people with ADHD, you see become independent business people. They're still ADHD. It's just they're letting it out in societally acceptable ways. Because when you think about it, when you're an independent businessman, you're not doing the same thing for 8 hours. It's necessary for your survival as a business person for your attention to be jumping around. I need to attend to this customer. I need to think about this case. I need to check on my inventory. I need to get this advertisement out. I need to check my books. All these different things that you need to be thinking about all at once. And in that way, then, the ADHD becomes an asset. I mean, it's sort of the logic. If I'm going to be thinking about 15 things at once anyway, why don't I just accept that and make them 15 productive things? Okay, so that's different ways. Yeah?
I have another question.
Yeah.
On the flip side of that, is there a tendency among people with Tourette's then to try to almost keep busy to keep the symptoms under control and to sort of keep running and to never stop? Or is that not necessarily, some people that are in some other kind of psychic pain, people who have sad things or things that they're trying to escape from, often just are just so busy so that they don't have to stop and face it.
Right.
Is there any similarity with that being Tourette's or not?
I don't know if it's not a stopping and facing it. I think it's more just almost a sort of a law of effect. If it feels good, continue doing it. And lots of people just kind of pick up on the fact, hey, if I weight lift, if I jog for an hour, if I doing something very active, it wears me out, and I'm satiated. And they may not be thinking of it in that language, but I mean, it seems to be helping them calm down, getting sort of exhausting some of this disinhibition, so they may just keep doing it. If you ever notice your kids when they rage, I mean, their quietest times, their most sort of peaceful, tranquil, serene times are after the rage, because what that is all this stuff they've been suppressing, all this stuff they've been holding in, not letting out, building and building and building, and finally it sort of reaches the top of the test tube and spills over, and it just, you blow, and you exhaust all this stuff in one big fell swoop, and then it's gone. It's just all this stuff that you've been fighting that caused you to have the rage in the first place has been used up, and so there is nothing to make them be anxious anymore. They're very exhausted too, because they've been very physical and such in the rage. But
so that may be why you have periods of time where everything is calm and seems very together, and then all of a sudden you get another raise.
Because the person might be suppressing, yes.
Okay, so they've got the stress out, and now I'm back down to 0 level, so I may take 2 or 3 weeks
Right.
to rebuild again, and then,
Right, and a lot, I think it's a real misnomer when people talk about low frustration tolerance, because it's not that there's low frustration tolerance, it's just you have a lot to tolerate that people don't see. So that talking about your beaker, I guess, that, I mean, everyone's got this much sort of room to build before they blow. And they do too. It's just that what's going on in the head, suppress this tick, suppress this tick, suppress this tick. Don't think about that. Stop thinking about that. Are they noticing me? I think they're laughing at me. You're up to here already. So you walk up to the person. They seem to be by themselves. You know, there's no big deal. There hasn't been anything going on that day. You very, in a non-hostile, non-accusatory way, using all your strategies, you know, ask this person to do something. Boom! And you're like, my God, that person has low frustration. No, it's just, they're already, you're the straw, I guess.
you haven't seen what's gone on there.
Right, right. Yeah?
It's a very hard part for a parent of the ADHD child. When they rage, it's very hard for you have to take the blessings when you get them, because when they do blow, and then all of a sudden they're as quiet and as calm and as peaceful as could be, you think, why does she do this to me?
It looks very
Honestly,
manipulative, yes.
You think they're doing it to you on purpose, and you've got to sit back and realize they're not doing it to you on purpose, they can't help it.
I think one of the reasons why it often looks like it's on purpose is because I'll hear parents say, I know they're doing it on purpose. They always do it at the most inopportune time. Just when I don't need this at all, I have no time to handle this, boom, he starts pushing the buttons and I can't stop.
Or you have to go to work at night.
Yeah.
6:30, you're getting ready to leave.
But I guess, I just to continue with what I just said, that looks manipulative, yes, because it's the worst possible time. But when you think about it, that is when you would expect it to happen. Because how would you define the most inopportune time? Maybe the situation is brand new, novel. You don't know how to you don't know how to deal with it yourself. Maybe it's a very unstructured situation. Maybe it's a very unexpected situation. You weren't expecting this to fall on your lap, and all of a sudden, you know, you've had to deal with certain things. There's been a radical, immediate, unexpected new change of plans or something. And that equals stress. Equals stress on you, which is why you think it's the worst possible time, but also equals stress on the person with the disorder. And of course, as I've said a little earlier, stress fuels this disorder, makes it worse than ever, blows it up, sort of, you know, makes the beaker overflow. So I mean, it's unfortunate that, you know, both people are at their worst at the same time, but it doesn't necessarily mean that's manipulative. Yeah.
I'm just wondering, when you were saying that usually it manifests or 7 to 12, is it?
7 to 10.
7 to 10? Then when you said you weren't diagnosed until you were at university,
Yeah.
how, I don't understand how you could went on all that time without being diagnosed, you know what I mean?
Okay, actually, I'm going to continue on with my talk right now because that next spot is going to address that for you. So basically, before we got into questions, the last thing I was going with here is I was talking about different ways you can use up this disinhibition. That it doesn't have to be used up in a bad way or a good way. It just has to be used up. And so if you're ticking, you use it up in a motoric way. If you're ADHD, you use it up in an intentional way. Now it can go a different direction. I mean, if you want to or if your predisposition is to let it out in a certain way, and that way is blocked, the disinhibition is going to be on the move again. It's going to start roving around. It's going to find a new way to come out. So that oftentimes when you see children medicated for ADHD, they get ticky. And that's because, I mean, sort of their predisposition, the water has fallen into the attentional area of the ice cube tray. But then, once you take the medication, that's like fixing the hole. So you've covered up that hole, so you've denied access to that area anymore. So now the water goes on a wander someplace else and finds the next weakest area. You know, or else, you know, water kind of, you know, it's like tipping the ice cube tray, and the water goes from one hole to another, to another, to another, kind of looking for a place to show up. So yeah, lots of times kids that are ADHD, that are medicated for their ADHD, they get ticky. People that have Tourette's, that are medicated for their tics, often become more obsessive compulsive. And to move away from just the medication aspect and now to answer your question, when I was younger, I learned very quickly and very brutally that tics just were not acceptable. That no one understood what was going on, and I was having nightmares of being, locked up in a cage someplace. I was petrified. I didn't know anything about Tourette's. I'd never heard of. I probably didn't know the word psychology at this point, let alone Tourette's syndrome and disinhibition and such. So I didn't know what to think, but I knew that if I ticked, that was a really bad thing. So, like I said, I massively suppressed in front of people my tics. But I had the opportunity to help my parents move just about a month ago. And it really brought home to me when I went up in the attic and started moving all my stuff, just how obsessive compulsive I was when I was a kid. I was like, that's really how I manifested then. I was denying access to this motoric area, so it was leaking over into obsession compulsions. And I filled the attic. I just hoarded, all sorts of stuff. I'd really obsessed on Star Trek, and I think back to it now. No matter where I went, no matter what I did, no matter what I was doing, no matter what I was supposed to be doing in that area, I was thinking about Star Trek, and wow, there's Star Trek this or that there. I couldn't so much as, go to Big V without flipping through all the newspapers, seeing if there was a Star Trek article in there or something. And I guess, even that was sort of suppressed, I suppose, to a degree, because, I wasn't obsessing on washing my hands or something. I was sort of obsessing in a sort of societally condoned way. It was a hobby. It was a hobby completely out of control. But it was giving me some way of using up some of that water, at least, I guess. So does that help answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. So in general, I hope what you're getting from, when I'm talking about this disinhibition idea, and that there's different ways of sort of getting out this energy once it's, decided where it's going to land and such. I hope you see a few things. I mentioned this already. I hope you see that it's not a good or a bad thing. It's just a thing. And it's when I talk about amplification of self, when you're amplified, everything's amplified. It's not just, it's bad things that are focused on. It's the bad things that are written up as symptomatology in the DSM. But, that doesn't mean it's just bad stuff that this disinhibition is doing. It's raising the bad stuff, but it's also raising the good stuff, too. And there are so many famous people out there that have these different types of disorders. Just off the top of my head, I forgot to bring my list, but Emily Dickinson, Thomas Edison, Mozart, Robin Williams. If anyone can think of anyone else, throw it out. Jim Carrey's got some. I don't know what. But again, it's not, the man is brilliant. I really take my hat off to him because he is making literally millions of dollars off of, Mike Myers does, millions of dollars off of his disorder. And it's not a fluke. It's not like you can look at this list of people and say, oh wow, isn't that nice, they overcame their disorder and they've accomplished this anyway. No, it's because of their disorder that they've been the movers and shakers. Yeah?
How do you think your self-esteem has been so high with the disorder? Like, your parents, the background, your life?
It wasn't.
Into that, or was it just
Well, it's a very, very simple answer to that. It wasn't. I've mentioned that it's really important to understand the disorder, and the fact that I'm standing up here and you see me with lots of self-confidence and esteem now is proof that understanding this disorder is one of the most important things you can do. Because there was a period in my life where I derived no enjoyment out of anything. Life was not to be enjoyed, it was to be endured. And I hoped it would end anytime soon, and took measures to that effect. There was a period in my life where it was not a matter of whether I would kill myself, it was a question of when, because I was just miserable. And so, no, it's not like I've had all this esteem in the face of all this. It's very much been a damage control process that once I got into first year university, fortunately I had chosen psychology, largely because I did so much introspection anyway already, trying to figure out what the hell was up, that I leaned in that direction and sort of passed all my psychological knowledge through this sort of Tourettic filter. How can this apply to me? How can I understand what's going on here? How can this little psychological tidbit help me? And so, again, I guess to talk about my own advantage to having this disorder, I mean, I think I'm going to be a really good psychologist working with these kids because I've spent so much time having to think about these issues. I mean, it wasn't a question of, gee, do I feel like studying now or do I feel like watching The Simpsons? I mean, it was a literally a do or die type thing. And sure, I had to go through all this crap that other people didn't go through, but now I've got a lot of advantages that just no one else does. And it's really, it's carved me a niche, I suppose, for the rest of my life. I mean, that certainly helps me with my esteem and my confidence too, that I know where I'm going and I know I'm going in a good way. What time is it now? 25 minutes, so I got 5 minutes to sort of wrap this up. Oh, that's working well. It's good. Okay. Okay, so I want to realize a few things. First of all, it's not a good or bad thing. It's just a thing, and depending on how you let it out, not only might you be able to hide your disorder, but you might be able to convince people you don't even have a disorder. My mother is the most ADHD person you will ever meet in your life. But she's never been diagnosed with ADHD. She never will be diagnosed with ADHD. I certainly will not ever bring up to her again. And it's not worth it because she is also an independent businesswoman. And she is an extraordinarily successful businesswoman because it's an asset to her. And in a situation like that, because she's just luckily or coincidentally or serendipitously, I suppose, found her niche and sort of focused her attention, no pun intended, in that direction, there's no point in giving her a label because, I mean, she's doing fine. And I mean, she wouldn't really fit the label anyway because the label, again, just emphasizes on the bad stuff, and she's showing all the good ways to manifest, I suppose. The other thing I guess I kind of already, no, I didn't go over this. The other thing I want you to notice is when I'm talking about this energy that needs to come out, lots of strategies that people just kind of come up on their own with very good intentions. Like, I mean, they're not malicious parents or anything. I mean, it's often intuitive strategies that seem to be the best thing to do, is to get the person to stop or to deny them from doing something or whatever. And I hope what I'm communicating is that this stuff does need to come out, and if you try to suppress it, I mean, you're going to go into rages because it's got to find a way to come out. Or if you suddenly try and just stop the person without giving them an out, without giving them another way for it to come out, they're going to rage or something like that. I mean, and if you continually try to suppress, you're not going to be able to do that, and so you end up like I was when I was 15, standing in front of the mirror, tearful, saying, "Stop ticking." And you tick again, you punch yourself. "Stop ticking." And you tick again, you punch yourself. And I mean, that sort of thing is a fruitless exercise. What you've got to realize is that it's okay if it comes out. Don't deny the expression. And don't try and develop strategies to deny the expression. Try and find strategies to hone the expression or to direct the expression. Because if you want to make us normal, you're not going to. It just is not going to work. You can medicate us all you want. You can make our lives miserable all you want, but it's not going to happen. I mean, this stuff has to come out. This is just who we are. We have extra disinhibition that is going to come out in some way. So the best way for you and the best way for us is just to work on ways for it to come out. Just one last point I want to make really quick, because I probably have about 2 minutes left, is that just one other quick way of, when you're thinking of strategies, one other way to sort of conceptualize these disorders, remember that it's, like I said, your attention's jumping all over the place, you've got all sorts of tics, you've got all these sort of voices in your head. It's analogous to 15 people talking to you at once. So when you're coming up with strategies, and you people are the best people to come up with these strategies because you know your kids the best, and with the generalized principles, you can kind of go away and hone an individual package for your son and daughter or whatever. But when you're thinking about coming up with these strategies, think about how you react or how you act when you've got 15 people talking to you at once. Because that's all they're doing. I mean, their reactions are not unusual. You would be reacting the same way. You wouldn't be able to hear all the instructions. You'd get angry at people because they're all talking to you at once. You'd have sequencing problems. Gee, should I do that first or that first? Because, I've heard 15 things at once. You'd miss a lot of non-verbal subtleties because, when you got 15 people at once, who has any room left on their mental workbench to figure out the intricacies of irony or sarcasm? Or, someone's very subtle nonverbal gesture that they're annoyed at you. if you've got 15 people talking at once, your nonverbal communication is going to be kind of tense and looking aggressive and such. So I guess just to finish up then, I mean, think about it that way, because I mean, it is likened to 15, when you've got your attention jumping all over the place, you're thinking about 15 things at once, you're stuck on one thing. It's like having 15 voices going on in your head at once. It's like going to one room in a house, turning on the light, going to the next room, turning on the light, going on the next room, turning on the light. These people have all their lights on in their house, and it's soaking up a whole lot of electricity. So gotta remember that when you're coming up with your own strategies for dealing with this too. And the final thing I want to say is that everything I've said about the disorder today, none of it is excuse. It's all explanation. And particularly since I'm talking about it's not me versus it, I don't have that scapegoat. It's him over there. You punish him. It's not my fault. I have Tourette's. It's that guy. I didn't mean to do it. It's never a scapegoat. It's never a crutch. It's never a convenience. It's me amplified by this disorder. So it's always me. I am always responsible. I'm always accountable for all of my actions. And yes, you can understand the disorder. You can learn to empathize with the person. You can learn to help strategize to minimize that disorder. But ultimately, I mean, this person still is responsible for their own behavior. If they're expected to clean their room, and you've made accommodations for, telling them how to clean the room and allowances, based on understanding their disorder. If they don't clean the room, you should, with a clear conscience, discipline that child as quickly, the same way as you would a normie. So, thanks a lot.